Knockett slammed one of his right fists on the ship's console in frustration. This new world had initially looked suitable for colonization 4 months ago when survey probes had arrived and started transmitting data. A crude survey ship had been sent. The ship had been there several days with somewhat favorable readings, so the ship had sent down a landing party to take samples. Knockett was a berberin, a mammalian species with 4 arms, 3 eyes, horns, and a tail. His skin was red with bright blue patches of fur. His hands had a thumb and 3 fingers, with each finger ending in a blue claw. His feet had 4 toes with heavily calloused pads and 4 toes, also with heavy blue claws. He stood 2 meters high, and would be 2.1 if the blue horns around the crown of his red skull grew just a little bit longer. The blue patches of fur were shaved in assorted designs, mostly the swirls and waves favored by his clan. Being on the landing party was terrifying. You were basically volunteering for horrible death in an endless number of ways. That is why generous compensation was always paid to landing party personnel before they embarked, so that their families would be well provided for in the case of their gruesome demise. In preparation, a probe was sent to the surface to measure gravity. That had been a disappointment. The gravity was nearly double galactic standard. That meant that all machinery would have to be excessively reinforced and constructed of expensive, ultra-durable materials to avoid immediate damage on light work. Also, it would be extremely stressful on any personnel down there. It would be like trying to live and work while being excessively obese, except without the extra bulk. When the landing party arrived, they ran atmospheric scans. The world had about 20% oxygen, which meant that the natural atmosphere could be filtered to create breathable air versus needing atmospheric generators. That was a big obstacle, which was fortunately not an issue in this case. So then they tested for poisonous gases. The results were good, trace amounts that would not present a significant health hazard. Then there was particle testing. What sorts of pollen, dust, ash, and other substances were in the atmosphere? That did yield some disturbing results. Some areas had excessively high pollen counts. There were areas with active volcanoes that regularly spewed ash into the air. There were deserts with high winds that would blow dust. Then there was radiation. The star of this system was a pretty average yellow star, so while it did exude a good amount of heat and light, it also emitted a fair amount of radiation. The world didn't have rings, and it had only 1 moon to help absorb the radiation. Probes of the moon showed lots of craters where it had fortunately blocked several meteorites that could have resulted in extinction-level events. Even so, surveys of the planet still showed deterioration from radiation and sizable craters that would have caused extinctions in regions or smaller continents. For settling this world, not only would structures have to be reinforced construction, but there would also need to be heavy window shielding to reduce radiation exposure. The best solution was to construct partially or fully underground, but people suffered psychological ailments when deprived of natural light from a star. Even when artificial lighting was bright and set on timers to simulate natural diurnal and nocturnal cycles, people still suffered disruption to their circadian rhythms. So, on such worlds, often huge expensive domes that required constant maintenance would be constructed. The landing party had been on and off the surface for several days. Days off on the ship were spent in water tanks, as much as possible. Besides contaminants, the atmosphere also had weight and thickness. They would be in the water tanks with breathing masks. The weight of the water was to simulate the pressure of the air and the gravity, so that landing party members didn't go into shock going to and from the planet. The goal was to maintain steady pressure as much as possible, to help get the landing party acclimated so that they would be able to stay on the planet for longer periods of time. It would take many days and analysis of air samples to determine that breathing unaided might be possible. This was after the atmospheric pressure inside the landing suit had been adequately adjusted and the individual was acclimated. Of course, there was also the necessity of a filtered breathing mask, but the poor wretch who would be the first to open the seal on their helmet was given another generous compensation payment. Having the pressure regulated inside the suit was simply not the same as being exposed to raw atmosphere. No matter what adjustments were made or scanning technology was used, exposure to alien atmosphere was always very uncomfortable, often disorienting. The landing party was certainly earning their exorbitant salaries this time. At the landing zone, not only was the gravity intense being far south, but the humidity gave the air dampness like bathing. The landing party, in top physical condition before arriving, was now in a constant state of exhaustion, requiring excessive sleep and double normal calorie consumption just to be minimally functional. Injuries from the world were occurring on a regular basis. A simple fall from standing, or even sitting, would result in fractures. Blood clots, aneurysms, and dysregulated blood pressures caused serious casualties, including early disability resembling geriatric frailty or death. There were several strains, sprains, and dislocations. Some had discovered unknown congenital defects due to the extraordinary physical stress aggravating these unknown conditions, which probably would never have been an issue if the person had never come to this alien hell. A few landing party members had simply quit. They would be found weeping, utterly desolate at the thought of having to go down there again. Those poor wretches were part of the reason why exploration vessels needed a generous complement of mental health caregivers. The gravity was lightest at the equator, but the temperature at the equatorial region was simply impossible. The heat was like what you would feel in space, exposed to the star without shielding. The planet did have indigenous life forms in the equatorial regions, which made you wonder what sort of mad gods had created such a world, with beasts that could survive an environment that cooked you alive. Another problem with the equatorial region was the disruption of atmospheric and water vortices. In the northern hemisphere, a vortex always went the same direction. In the southern hemisphere, it always went the opposite direction. But at the equator, an atmospheric or water vortex may switch direction, spin itself out, or collide and merge with another vortex, producing a superstorm. The poles of the planet were unimaginably cold. Metals and other materials that could withstand deep space far from stars were forged in such areas. As a boy, Knockett had been on a tour of a science lab studying cryodynamics, the effects of extreme cold. He had seen beautiful snowflakes, freeze-dried foods, and examples of frozen mummification. But what had been most shocking were the supposedly invulnerable items that became brittle or even shattered in extreme cold. He had suffered nightmares for weeks after seeing that, requiring several sessions of trauma counseling. His older brother, a sadist by nature, had told him that the god Adj, who consumed the souls of the evil, did it by freezing sinners, then shattering their frozen bodies and eating the little bite-sized pieces. Even though that had been many years ago, Knockett still occasionally had nightmares. The most survivable weather could be found about halfway between the equator and the poles. However, that was only in the southern hemisphere, because in the northern hemisphere, the planet's magnetic field was too strong. When Knockett had visited a zoology institute as a child, they had demonstrated how wildlife would migrate according to magnetic orientation. They had demonstrated in artificial environments where they had changed natural migration patterns through the use of additional magnets. He had taken a brief class on medical magnetism, the study of medical applications and disorders from magnetic fields. It was rather surprising how much magnetic fields affected your health, even though you didn't realize it. This planet had a significant water-to-land ratio, about 2 parts water versus 1 part land. There were several continents, but the continents were dispersed around the planet, with large mountain ranges, meaning that not only did the continents have different weather patterns, but continents would have regions with very inconsistent weather. You would travel along latitudinal lines, perfectly parallel with the equator, and encounter forest, desert, swamp, mountains, and a full spectrum of combinations of those environments. To add to all the complications, the water surrounding continents was actually a saline solution with countless particles, microorganisms, substances, and who knew what else. There were areas of water on the continents that didn't have saline consistency, so adequate filtration could be set up at some point, hopefully. Then, gods help us, there was indigenous fauna. It seemed that some worlds intentionally followed evolutionary tracks that seemed to be trying to create apex predators of every species possible. Landing parties would bring scanning equipment to try to detect local wildlife, especially the hungry ones. But first, the scanners would have to be calibrated to detect the creatures. There was foliage, air particles, terrain features, camouflage coloration, and weather that would need to be compensated for in order to accurately calibrate the scanners. Sometimes, all that would be left of the landing party member would be shredded pieces of the environmental suit. Landing party members who survived, evaded, or discovered victims of animal attacks would also need the services of mental health caregivers. Taking off the helmet of a landing party suit was an ordeal. The actual mechanical process was quite easy. The difficulties came from apprehension and vertigo. No matter how many different ways you had scanned and sampled a world, it was still never the same as when you actually removed your helmet. Winds could create variances in atmospheric pressure, especially on planets with dense air, creating inner ear turbulence and vertigo. The light from the star, especially during the day, may distort colors, plus atmospheric conditions, including gases and humidity, could affect sight. Sound may travel oddly due to moisture, temperature, or wind. But most disorienting by far were the smells. Dear gods of the elements in the abyss, alien smells were so overpowering as to almost cause amnesia. Vomiting was a fairly common response, so part of standard landing party training was how to quickly remove a filter mask from your face, vomit, and replace it before inhaling too many pathogens. Nockit had survived 4 landing parties himself, an exceptionally high number, and had retched violently every time. It had left him severely weak and dehydrated, so he would have to return to the ship for a couple of days. His fellow Berberans had a great deal of respect for him in that each time, once he recovered, he had rejoined the landing party. The source of Nockit's frustration was the ship that was approaching and sending a hailing beacon. Damn humans! They were like a flesh-eating infection, spreading like voracious parasites. Unfortunately, his communications technician had never encountered humans before, so she followed standard protocol of playing the hail on the bridge's public speakers. It was absolutely the most terrifying cacophony that any of the poor Berberans had ever heard. It started with primal screams, surely from Adj himself, as he slaughtered and consumed the souls of the wicked. Then came noises that must be the wails of a planet that was being destroyed by its star going nova. Finally, a roaring voice emerged. "We come from the land of the ice and snow, from the midnight sun where the hot springs flow. The hammer of the gods will drive our ships to new land. To fight the horde, sing and cry, Valhalla, I am coming. On we sweep with the threshing oar. Our only goal will be the western shore. Ah! Ah! As the primal screams started again, the panicked communications technician managed to mute the symphony of the damned. Nockit saw that the majority of the bridge crew was trembling in fear, and a few had started weeping. Nockit sat down to steady his own shaking body, then opened a channel to the human ship. "Attention, alien vessel. This is the Berberin ship AZ-259. Be advised, while we are on a peaceful exploration mission, we have the means and the will to defend ourselves if necessary. State your intent." A voice chuckled over the communication system. "This is United Earth civilian vessel Sinbad, AZ-259. Calm down. We don't have hostile intentions, just saying hi. You know how it is. When I listen to classic music, so do all the neighbors." Nockit gritted his teeth. He remembered how a Berberin diplomat to Earth had described its inhabitants. Never assume that things can't get worse, because a human will always be able to prove you wrong. Knockit retorted to the human vessel. Music? That sounded like a declaration of war! Are you torturing hostages? This time Knockit heard several voices in raucous laughter, and evidently a few fists banging on consoles. No, nothing like that. We're just here to set up an initial survey camp so we can start settling and claim this world. Knockit hoped he sounded menacing. Negative, Earth vessel! This world is in the process of being claimed and settled by the Berberan Integrated Clan Government. This planet is off limits! The human voice replied laconically. Yeah, that's what you think. Tell you what, we are going down there and setting up. You're welcome to follow us down if you want to talk. By the way, I'm Captain Odysseus Stavros. The Earthship, true to its captain's word, went down to the surface and landed only a couple 100 meters from the Berberan site. As much as Knockit dreaded the idea, he would have to go down and speak with the humans. They were known to be as stubborn as mountains. Knockit assembled landing party members who had recovered enough to go back down there, plus a political officer who would help him assert the Berberan claim. The political officer was a Verember. Berberan and Verember were genetically the same race, but their cultural differences were greater than their cosmetic differences. They both had the same shaped bodies, 4 arms, 3 eyes, tail, claws, and horns. But Berberan were red with cobalt blue fur shaved into swirls and waves. Verember were yellow with emerald green horns and fur shaved into zigzag stripes. Berberan spoke plainly and boldly, while Verember seemed to prefer innuendo and sarcasm. Even their name was an annoyance. Berberan in the old language meant Ber has created all. Verember meant followers of Ber. They didn't seem to comprehend that Ber was a supreme deity, not just a philosopher. However, sometimes those annoying cultural differences, even the quasi-blasphemous ideas, could be useful, especially when dealing with alien races. In the departure shuttle, people were grim-faced. Knockit and the political officer, Mtalal, had been to the medical specialists for medications that would help them endure the planet, since they didn't have the several days' preparation of the landing party. Those medications came with a price. The effective duration was only about 5 hours, and recovery from both the medications and the environment would involve several days of pain and intravenous feeding, plus follow-up monitoring for several years to ensure there was no permanent damage or aggravation of dormant congenital health problems. Knockit could feel his animosity towards humans grow into actual hatred. Because the Berberans, Verembers, Mtalal stubbornly insisted on saying, had an established site, they actually landed sooner and were able to start walking towards the human landing site. Dear gods, this was exhausting. They had to stop and rest several times. Mtalal expressed a wish that they could have brought along a transport or at least a portable shade device, but the ground was too uneven for a vehicle, and the weight of the shade would have been too excessive to negotiate. They got to the human site just in time to see them exiting their ship. The humans walked out in landing party ships, a few carrying equipment bundles, others carrying scanners, and many carrying weapons. Several of the Berberans were frightened at the sight of the weapons. Knockit reassured his people. Humans have a saying, shoot first and ask questions later. When their intentions are hostile, they immediately engage in combat, then communicate with survivors. Since they didn't start by shooting, they are more interested in negotiating over combat. The Berberans had stopped to rest again, sitting on a downed log and a couple of large rocks. The humans walked straight over to them. When they got closer, the humans waved at them, and their leader extended a hand and spoke. Howdy, neighbor. Mtalal pointed at the human's hand.
It's a gesture of non-hostile greeting. Extend your hand. You and the humans will clasp each other's hands and move the hands vertically in unison. Just relax. Doesn't take long.
Knockit extended his hand. He could tell the human was trying to be gentle, but its grip was like forged metal. He was thrown off balance when the human twisted their hands slightly to look at Knockit's hands. Huh, 3 fingers. That's different. As the human leader released Nocket's hand, a human technician called over. Air's good, Captain. Then he reached up and released his helmet latch and took off his helmet. The other humans watched him for a moment, then released their own helmet latches. The Berberans watched them in shock, staring, almost glaring, expecting the humans to go into respiratory distress. It didn't happen. One human in the back was fumbling with his latch, growled inaudibly, then slowly and deliberately tried again. He grumbled, I hate these things. Why can't they be easier? One of the other humans chuckled at him. So you don't accidentally pop the seal on a spacewalk and your head explodes. The first human managed to unlatch and remove his helmet. The others chuckled, while the first human violently sneezed 3 times. One of the other humans responded, timed with the sneezes. Achoo! Bless you. Achoo! Bless you. Achoo! Get that fixed. The sneezing human glared at his crewmate, then produced a tissue and blew his nose thunderously. His crewmate gave him a surprised look. God damn! How do you still have a nose on your face? The sneezing human looked at him wearily. You're not funny. The other humans seemed to disagree, as they all smiled and laughed quietly. This was unbelievably unsettling for the Berberans. The humans had shed the protection of their helmets and safe atmosphere just minutes after landing. The political officer, quite savvy in observation, noted how easily humans joked about death. There were endless fantastic rumors about humans. Between the terrifying opening hail and the casual interaction he saw here, it seemed the rumor that human religion was some sort of death cult may be true. Hopefully, the part about them sacrificing and feasting on conquered enemies for their gods was not. The human leader turned to Nocket and gave a slight wave. Captain Odysseus Stavros, I believe we met up there already. He pointed up to the sky. Call me Stav. The captain had dealt with aliens before. Usually it smoothed things along to give aliens a one-syllable moniker to use. There were more than enough opportunities for misunderstanding and giving offense due to gaps in translator software and differences in culture, or just random dumbassery. The name thing was easy. Nocket stood up from the log he was sitting on. Talal gave a mild grunt and stood also. Nocket breathed heavily as he declared, I am Captain Nocket, commander of the exploration and colonial ship AZ-259. I claim this world for the Berberan people. Talal interjected, And Verember. Nocket glared at him momentarily, then continued, As the first sentient settlers of this world, in accordance with galactic colonization law. He and Talal sat back heavily on the log. The gravity here was just oppressive. Stav shrugged casually. We'll see about that. Just then, one of the humans came quickly shuffling up. He seemed to have a thick body, very sturdy with generous amounts of fat and muscle. He had a flag with a short flagpole in one hand and a berry cluster in the other. The berries were a deep mauve color, and the human, Bobo, had matching stains around his mouth and on his teeth. He held out the flag to Stav. I got the flag, Captain. Where do you want it? Stav pointed at a piece of ground only a couple meters from him and Nocket. Right there, Bobo. Then come here. Bobo smiled broadly. Nocket and Talal noted he had a somewhat dull look to his eyes and face. He stabbed the flag in the ground firmly in one hand, but it wound up leaning. He tried stabbing it a couple more times one-handed, but it still leaned. He stared at the flag and berries in his hands for a moment. Stav gave a pained sigh, while other human crewmen chuckled and rolled their eyes. One human finally held out his hand. Bobo looked back and forth for a minute, then understood. He put the berry cluster in the other human's hand. He used both hands now to firmly plant the flag. Then he put his fists on his hips and proudly declared, Earth! Then he reached over and took back the berry cluster. He was about to resume eating when Stav asked him, What you got there, Bobo? There was a slight note of concern in his voice. Bobo smiled, teeth brightly stained, and Talal made a note. apex predator species, even after achieving full sentience, would bare their teeth in certain situations, usually when trying to assert some sort of dominance. Interestingly, the humans would show teeth in all sorts of facial expressions, from normal speaking to establishing dominance to even friendly social interaction. It was bizarrely fascinating. Bobo pointed at some bushes.
"There's a whole bunch of these berries growing all over, Captain. They're sweet and ripe. You should try some."
Stav closed his eyes and sighed in exasperation. Bobo, no. Come on, you know better. Don't eat alien food until Doc clears it. Bobo was chewing a large mouthful. Stav told him, Don't complain if you get sick. He pointed to another human carrying a more complex scanner. Go have Doc scan those berries. Stav closed his eyes, put his hands up by his face, and shook his head. I swear, that guy, dumber than a box of hair, but will work from sunup to sunset without complaining. Not a mean bone in his body, and at least he can follow simple instructions. Very simple instructions. Stav scratched his head for a moment. Where was I? Oh, yeah. I, Captain Odysseus Stavros of the United Earth civilian ship Sinbad, hereby lay claim to this world in accordance with galactic law, as the first naturally compatible colonization species, etc., etc. Knockit glared up at him.
Your claim is invalid. We were here first.
Stav folded his arms and firmly planted his feet. You may have arrived here first, but we are the ones who will live here. You know galactic law. Whenever a world has disputed ownership, whichever species can exist there naturally has a more valid claim. Your people aren't even popping their helmets, while in the meantime I've already got a man, sort of, stuffing his face with native fruit. This world is ours. Knockit breathed heavily, then activated a button on his helmet. It changed his communication from speaker that could be heard by all to a local transmission that would be received only by his landing party. Is there anyone who can safely remove their helmet? Talal's voice came over the channel.
Captain, in case no one can, we can simply tell the humans it was safe for us until they arrived. But since they may have brought unknown pathogens, we are staying sequestered until our xenobiologists can run detailed scans and testing. That should save us diplomatic leverage.
Lockett was grateful. Normally, Virumbur's snideness and cynicism were extremely annoying, even infuriating, but it came in quite useful at times. It was no surprise that the majority of political officers, intelligence officers, market analysts, and anthropologists, xeno and domestic, were Virumbur. A voice gritted over their communications channel.
9,000 credits.
Knockit acknowledged. Kubur began to unlatch his helmet. Kubur were an agnostic clan, whose name meant what is Bur in the old language. They seemed rather undecided if Bur was a divine being who created the universe or just a sophisticated philosopher. They had black skin with brown fur that was shaved to form spots and patches. Interestingly, their horns and claws were black, not the same color as their fur, like with the other members of their species. Kubur were extremely pragmatic and generally said very little. 3 other landing party members began to remove their helmets. Knockit rapidly calculated. Damned humans had just cost him 36,000 credits. They still had safety masks on when they removed their helmets. Knockit took Mtal's advice.
We have better safety standards than you do. That is why we keep our masks and helmets on until we have taken multiple samples and compared results. Your presence has potentially introduced new pathogens. You are reckless. We are not. We were here first. This is our world. Our claim is legal, and we will do what is necessary to protect our property.
Knockit had started breathing heavily. His joints were beginning to ache. Some of the Berberans were putting their helmets back on. One started to put his helmet back on, but quickly yanked it and his safety mask off so he could vomit. As he vomited, he was having a hard time catching his breath in the thick air. A Berberan medic shuffled to him as quickly as possible and administered a general muscle relaxant and anti-nausea medication. The human closest to them walked over and extended a canteen. "Hey, buddy, need some water? It's distilled, so it's pure. Take as much as you need." The Berberin medic took the canteen. Why was everything on this planet so damn heavy? The human showed him a straw apparatus which was so basic as to be compatible with the Berberin landing party suits. The medic was holding it with both hands for his patient and trying to find a spot to support the canteen. The human took the canteen in one hand and easily held it for the Berberins. It spoke reassuringly to the sick Berberin. "It's okay, buddy. Happens to the best of us." The medic produced a small cloth and was trying to wipe the vomit from his patient, but it was difficult juggling the drinking with the cleaning. Another human walked over and offered its canteen.
"Let me help you."
The second human had less heavily defined facial features and a higher-pitched voice. It was smaller and shorter, with a less bulky body. The way it moved seemed to indicate that body movement was centered around the hip, buttock, and thigh area, rather than the upper body of the other humans. It actually knelt down and was wetting its own cloth and wiping the Berberin patient gently, while speaking soothingly.
"It's okay. We will take care of you. I'm sorry you don't feel good. I promise everything will get better."
The medic was surprised. He had also heard rumors about humans being savage Deathworlders. He asked cautiously,
"Are you female?"
She nodded and continued to gently dab the patient's face. She produced a second cloth and wiped out small bits of vomit that had splashed into the helmet. She chuckled.
"I wish it was this easy with my son. He sneaked a bunch of cookies overloaded on sugar, then caught me in an epic barfnado. I was covered, nose to knees."
Stav could see that this was going to stall quickly. He asked Knockit, "Look, does your shuttle have climate control where your people will be more comfortable?" Knockit reluctantly nodded. He hated showing weakness, but trying to hide it would just point it out more. Stav said, "Then let's adjourn there. Lead the way." The Berberins got up slowly and started to walk back to their landing site. They would go a few meters, then need to rest. Stav was not going to waste the entire day walking a couple 100 meters. He radioed back to his ship. "Hey, Bruno, grab us some wagons that can take passengers. 6 will be plenty. And tell Gupta to send a security guard with the package in the red case. He will know which one." Bruno acknowledged and made the preparations. At the next rest, the vehicles came up to where both parties were stopped. The drivers of the vehicles were all in casual work clothes. Stav thought he saw the aliens glaring at them enviously. It was getting warm, especially with the environment suits. The humans all stripped their suits off and loaded them onto the smallest vehicle. He ordered the smallest vehicle to return to their ship, along with most of the humans. He kept 5 humans with him and ordered the rest back to the site to begin setup. The humans he kept with him were Mohammed, Mo, the security guard, Sue, who had helped care for the sick Berberin, Dave, who had initially given his water to the sick Berberin, Sanjay, Jay, a xeno-environmentalist, and Goldman, Gold, a legal specialist. They smilingly offered a ride to the Berberins. Knockit didn't want to take it, fearing it would weaken his position further, but clever Mtalal rescued him again.
"Captain, I advise taking the ride. In some alien cultures, it is considered rude to refuse such an offer, and we are establishing diplomatic relations here."
The humans all nodded in agreement, smiling, showing their predator teeth. The humans all drove their respective vehicles, except in his vehicle, Stav drove while Mo sat in the back seat, holding the red case. Stav had Knockit and Mtalal for passengers. He tried making small talk, but noticed the aliens weren't really paying attention. Sue had the alien who had gotten sick in her vehicle, and lagged behind as she took extra care to drive gently. When they got to the alien shuttle, Jay handed all of the humans a canister of compressed air. "The air in there might be a little thin. If you start feeling short of breath, just take a puff. Not too much. Hyperoxia is fine for recreation now and then, but let's not push it." Once in the shuttle, all the humans looked around curiously. Mo kept a tight grip on the red case, but examined everything possible. Once the air pressure in the shuttle normalized for the Berberans, they all removed their protective gear. The humans did find the air a bit thin, and would occasionally take a puff from their canisters. The Berberan furniture in the shuttle seemed fairly delicate, so Sue was the only human in a chair, while the others stood around. Knockit addressed Stav.
"We have heard about your aggressive expansionism. We have made a legitimate claim to this world that we are ready to defend. Consider this carefully. If you oppose us, you won't be dealing with just us. You will be making a lot of enemies by clearly violating galactic law."
Stav held his hands out, palms up, in a very non-threatening gesture.
"Look, we aren't interested in fighting. We reviewed all of your probe data and your scans here. Yes, this world has a lot of resources, but at the same time, it's completely unsuitable for you. It's perfect for us. This is the kind of paradise Earth was before our industrial ages."
Talal spoke up.
What do you mean you analyzed our data?
Stav took a couple of breaths off his air can.
"Damn, the air in here is thin. Reminds me of Denver. Anyway, we hacked the computers on your probes and your ships and made copies of the data. By the way, you guys are really thorough. We appreciate that."
Knockit was outraged.
"How dare you! We absolutely will not tolerate this!"
Stav put up a hand reassuringly, then beckoned Mo over.
"We can understand you're being upset, but it saved us a lot of time and money. That's why I'm prepared to reimburse you."
He opened the case that Mo had and withdrew a container containing several flawless, high-quality diamonds. Sue's eyes sparkled when she saw them. He placed the container on the console near Knockit and Talal. They both held it and stared at it carefully for a minute. Then Knockit spat out,
"You think you can bribe your way out of espionage charges? This is outrageous! My government will consider this an act of war."
Stav sniggered.
"Yeah, right. Galactic authorities will barely consider it a crime, if at all, because we didn't do anything hostile. Worst case scenario for us is they make us compensate you for the information, which is what I'm already doing."
Stav knew at this point that the aliens were out of leverage. Time to turn up the pressure.
"Look, this world is going to be hell for your people. You'll probably need at least 3 generations to adjust to it. My people are already dismantling our ship to make a settlement. We are here to stay. You simply won't make it here. Just cut your losses."
Knockit growled,
"This world is ours. We will not let you steal it from us."
At that point, Jay, the xeno-environmentalist, spoke up. "We won't take anything from you. In fact, we will even help you set up an encampment so that we can start trade with your people. But we know that you know, and you know that we know, you won't last here. All we have to do is wait. You will either leave or this planet will kill you." Gold spoke now.
The good news is that our current president likes to fight his wars with money instead of bombs. If we can work out an agreement, you will benefit from some very sweet trade deals. If we can't, then we will keep following your exploration ships, and every time you find a world where we can live but you can't, we will establish a competing claim that we will win. Then we will establish trade with someone else and completely cut you out. We will be deep in your territory, restricting your expansion, and you'll be losing a lot of revenue in both domestic production and trade. Make a decision. Expand or starve your economy."
Knockit was outraged. Talal was also feeling threatened, but he remembered the words of Burr, "An enemy's greatest weapons are your fear and anger." He stood, walked around the room, tapping on surfaces. It was a good tactic to get everyone's attention and give him a minute to think. Finally,
"You said that you will continue to follow and contest our ownership of our colonies. Is Earth truly ready for a war that size in alien territory?"
Stav held up his hands.
"We told you, our current president doesn't like to fight, but he loves to make deals. We don't have to fight you. All we have to do is outlast you. All these planets you can't settle and call Deathworlds, we call home. We are tracking 9 of your other explorers. 4 of them are headed to planets just like Earth. We are prepared to compensate you to help you cut your losses. It's the best deal you'll get. Besides that, you'll also be our first trade partners on these new worlds. Since that's in your territory, that's a sweet deal for you."
Knockit wanted to scream blasphemous, gory, sickening profanities at them. He finally shook his head.
"I need 6 days to consult with my government."
He glared straight at Stav.
"This in no way means that we accept your ludicrous proposal."
He took the container of diamonds and held it out to Stav. Stav waved his hand dismissively.
"Keep it. Like I said, your information about this world is good, so you deserve that reimbursement. And take as long as you like for contacting your government. We aren't going anywhere."
True to their word, the humans didn't go anywhere except to expand their settlement. Knockit and Mtalal were in frequent communication with their government. It seemed the threat about Earth explorers simply following Berberan explorers was completely valid, and they were even starting to use the same tactics against other species. In the greatest of humiliations, the humans also kept their promise about helping Berberans set up their settlements, including how to fortify structures against severe storms. That's when a shocking discovery was made. Humans had multiple natural abilities to detect approaching bad weather. It could be anything from assessing sunset colors to predict the following day's weather, to actually being able to smell impending precipitation. For the crew of Berberan ship AZ-259, this world had become an absolute hell. Legal experts had reviewed galactic law. Because humans on the planet were not leaving for any reason, including severe storms, if the Berberans left for any reason, the humans would have an unassailable claim. Berberan crew were desperately begging to leave this horrible place, especially as winter would be coming in a few short months. Talking with the humans, trying to persuade them to leave, actually made things worse. The humans were thriving and happy here. They rapidly expanded their settlement, as each individual claimed large chunks of land. EarthGov had made a decree. Any human from the initial crew who would stay on this world for a solar year and a day to help validate Earth's claim would be given 100 hectares with full water rights, and freedom from property tax for 100 solar years. The humans actually chafed and disobeyed safety recommendations, going out to explore and making land claims as quickly as possible. Talal had spoken with a human, Sean, about this. Sean had told him,
"Man, you have no idea what this place means to my family. We was poor since poor was invented. My people traveled around Earth, mostly North America, and couldn't ever catch a break. It was like the politicians and corporations kept taking turns to screw with us. But now we're here, and I'm going to get that land. For the first time in ever, my family is going to have generational wealth instead of generational debt. I'll let you in on something. If Galactic Gov gives you guys this world instead of Earth, we're still staying, but don't panic. As long as we can keep our land, we will work for y'all instead. I don't owe Earth a damn thing. I'm going to get mine, and I don't care if it's working for you or EarthGov. Just let me take care of my family. We just found out that we're pregnant. This baby is going to be the first human or Berberan born here. This is his home."
That news was devastating. Another Berberan had recently died. The humans had set aside a plot of land for a cemetery, explaining that these had significant cultural and historical significance in their legal system. They not only offered spots to bury dead Berberans, but actually did the impossible work of digging the hole. They attended the funeral, many wearing black clothing, with others wearing white. It seemed that different tribes of humans had different cultural meanings tied to certain colors. With another dead Berberan and a human child soon to be born, it seemed hopeless. It was time to force the ruling council to make a decision. The Burha, voice of Bur, sat at their respective desks in the debate chamber. They were the rulers of their world, granted their status by divine right. Each one had been born an albino from their respective clan or race. They would be raised by their families until adulthood, 20 years old, even learning a trade. Once they formally graduated to adulthood, they left their families behind and joined the ruling council. They were sterilized as children to prevent council membership from becoming hereditary. The size of the council grew and shrank, depending on how many members Burr currently had in existence. Each council member served until age 70. At that point, they could stay on as non-voting advisors and staff, return to their clans, or seek employment at a Hall of Heritage, telling younger people and historians about why the council had made its decisions. The council was currently debating the human problem. They were spreading, but give Burr gratitude, they seemed to prefer commerce to conquest. The council members from the Varumber clans had been poring over human historical records. It seemed that their natural state was chaos. Their history didn't have logical linear development, but rather seemed to randomly hop around different avenues of development. Sometimes war would bring innovation and prosperity, but other times it brought poverty and regression. Some eras of peace brought enlightenment, while other eras brought exploitation and hedonism. The way they handled slavery was also bizarre. Instead of progressively giving rights to slaves until slavery eventually evolved into a caste system, they would just abolish it in a designated region, then usually fight wars over abolition. The duration of the conflicts could be a few months up to several decades. Even once abolitionists would eventually win wars, organized crime would usually continue slavery as a shadow criminal enterprise. Oddly enough, some organized crime entities were beneficial to the local populace by reducing overall crime, which was how they stayed in power to continue their preferred crimes. Berberan members studied the human expansionist strategy. True to what they had been told, human ships would simply identify Berberan exploration ships, follow them, and again hack the computers to steal a copy of the data they collected. But fortunately, true to their word, they studiously avoided hostile action, and simply paid for the data when they found a suitable Deathworld. It seemed the human phrase that sealed the fate of a world was, "This place reminds me of Earth." Kabur Council members studied human engineering and architecture. The Deathworlders were used to impossibly dense materials and crushing gravity, so all of their construction methods naturally included reinforcement, even in garment manufacture. Fortunately, the current human dictator really did focus on commerce over conquest. It seemed his greatest joy in life was making trade deals and imposing sanctions. It was a huge relief to non-human governments that he had never been in their military, but had spent his entire life in commerce. The majority of human dictators had risen to power through military advancement, and were far more eager to use military force to achieve objectives. This one preferred negotiating commerce during lavish feasts or outdoor games that involved hitting rocks with sticks. The Council did relinquish their claims to the Deathworlds that humans wanted to claim, and they quickly negotiated very lucrative trade deals. The humans did the dangerous and grueling work planet-side of harvesting raw materials. Then Berberan cargo ships transported the goods to factories. Humans even shared their manufacturing technology, so that Berberans could manufacture goods for their use. And then there was Bobo. Bobo was the one human who had agreed to leave. Tullal had asked if any humans would be willing to come home with the Varumber. Berberans, Nockit had interjected, and be hosted as an informal guest. Stav had tried to prevent Bobo from leaving, concerned for his safety, but Bobo insisted. Bobo had been transported to the homeworld, and was now the indefinite guest of a Varumber council member. She was fascinated by him. She provided all his lodging and meals, selected his clothing, decided his daily itinerary and activities, and would even engage in diverting games with him as a pastime. Other Varumber tried to warn her that the human could be potentially dangerous, but she assured them that she had the situation well in hand. He did occasionally damage property, but for the most part was pretty harmless. Not only did he tolerate being touched, but he had endless patience, allowing children to roughhouse with him. He would just gently poke back with one of his squat fingers. Bobo was even allowed to contact Stav every week to update his former captain on his well-being. These transmissions were recorded and reviewed by the Burha because they gained many valuable insights. Bobo was happy because on Earth he had been frequently mocked for his low intelligence, But on the alien world, people really liked him, and he didn't have responsibilities. Stav turned off his view screen. It had been months, and Bobo was still happy as can be, even thriving. Sean, who had been listening to the conversation, pointed at the darkened screen and asked,
"Man, how long do you think it's gonna take him to figure out that he's somebody's dog?"
Stav shrugged.
"I got nothing.